When my daughter Megan told me to sell our family home to fund her boyfriend's business venture while I was literally dying of lung cancer, I smiled, walked to my study, and made one phone call to my attorney. By New Year's Eve, Megan had lost her inheritance entirely. And that was just the beginning of what she would lose. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. October 15th, 2023. I remember the date because it's burned into my memory like a brand. I was sitting in Dr. Anderson's office in downtown Denver, the same medical building where my Catherine had received her own devastating news 3 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Anderson said, his voice carrying that careful tone doctors reserve for life-altering moments. "The biopsy results show stage 3 non-small cell lung carcinoma. It's aggressive, but it's treatable with immediate chemotherapy and radiation." I nodded, feeling oddly calm. At 58, I had already buried my wife of 28 years. I'd raised our daughter Megan as a single father through her teenage years, put her through art school at the University of Colorado, and watched her struggle to find her place in the world. Cancer felt almost manageable compared to watching your child make increasingly questionable choices. "What's the timeline, Doc?" I asked the engineer in me, needing concrete facts. "Without treatment, 6 to 8 months. With aggressive treatment, we're looking at a very good chance of remission. The 5-year survival rate for your type and stage is about 60%. 60%. Those were odds I could work with. I'd built my construction business on worse odds than that. I drove home through the familiar streets of our Highlands neighborhood, past the coffee shop where Catherine and I used to have Sunday breakfast, past the park where I'd taught Megan to ride her bike. Our Victorian house sat on the corner of 32nd and Lowell, a 1920s beauty that Catherine and I had restored board by board. It was worth about $850,000 now. Our entire life's work wrapped up in hardwood floors and crown molding. Megan's car was in the driveway when I pulled up. A leased BMW X3 that I'd been quietly helping her pay for since she'd lost her job at the gallery 6 months ago. She was 26 and still figuring things out, I told myself. We all need help sometimes. I found her in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while eating cereal from one of Catherine's good bowls. She looked up when I walked in, and for a moment I saw Catherine's green eyes looking back at me. "Hey, Dad. How'd the doctor thing go?" The doctor thing. Like it was a routine checkup instead of a meeting that had just redefined the rest of my life. "Megan, we need to talk. Sit down." Something in my voice must have registered because she actually put the phone down. I took the chair across from her, the same spot where Catherine and I had told her about the divorce that never came, the moves that never happened, the dreams that somehow got smaller as real life took over. "I have lung cancer," I said simply. "Stage 3. It's serious, but treatable." Megan's face went through a series of expressions: shock, concern, and then something that looked almost like calculation. That last look troubled me, but I pushed the thought away. "Oh my God, Dad. Are you going to be okay?" "The doctors are optimistic. The treatment will be expensive. Even with insurance, we're looking at probably $40,000 out of pocket. But I've got savings, and the house is paid off. We'll manage." She reached across and squeezed my hand. "We'll get through this together. You and me, just like always." For a moment, I felt that familiar warmth that had gotten me through Catherine's death and all the lonely years since. Megan might be struggling to find her way, but she was still my little girl. We were still family. That feeling lasted exactly 3 weeks. It was a Tuesday evening in early November when Megan brought him home. I was in the living room reading through treatment options and insurance paperwork when I heard her key in the lock, followed by unfamiliar footsteps. "Dad, I want you to meet someone," she called out. "This is William Sterling." The man who walked into my living room was not what I'd expected. William Sterling looked like he'd stepped out of a country club magazine. Perfectly styled silver hair, an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the kind of confident bearing that comes from never having to check your bank balance. He was also old enough to be Megan's father. Hell, he was old enough to be my older brother. "Mr. Thompson," he said, extending a manicured hand. "I've heard so much about you. But you said yourself it's expensive. $40,000, Dad. That's going to wipe out your savings. And what if you need more treatment? What if it comes back? So, your solution is to gamble our house on some stranger's business venture. It's not gambling. It's investing in my future. William says if we sell the house, invest the money, and the business takes off like he expects, we could buy an even better house in a year or two. And if it doesn't take off?" Megan was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller. "Dad, William really cares about me. He wants to take care of me. This isn't just about business." My heart sank. It wasn't just that my daughter was involved with a man old enough to be her grandfather. It was that she was willing to risk our family home. The house her mother had died in, the house where she'd grown up. For a man she barely knew, and a business that existed only in smooth talk and expensive suits. "Megan, I need you to think very carefully about what you're asking me to do. This house isn't just an investment. It's our history. It's where your mother and I built our life together. It's where you learned to walk, where we celebrated every birthday and Christmas." "I know that, Dad. But it's also just a house. Mom is gone. You might be gone soon, too. I need to think about my future." The words hung in the air between us like a slap. Just a house. Mom is gone. You might be gone soon, too. What exactly are you saying, Megan? She took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice had a hardness I'd never heard before. I'm saying that spending $40,000 on treatment that might not even work seems like a waste when we could be investing in something that could actually change our lives. I felt something cold settle in my chest. You want me to skip cancer treatment so you can invest in your boyfriend's business? That's not how I meant it. Then how did you mean it? Megan stood up, her face flushed. I meant that you need to start thinking practically. You're 58 years old with stage 3 cancer. Even if the treatment works, what kind of life are you going to have? But if we invest wisely now, I could have a real future. I could finally have the life Mom always wanted for me. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 58 years. Your mother wanted you to be happy, Megan. But she also wanted you to be a good person. What's that supposed to mean? It means that a good person doesn't ask their dying father to choose between his life and her financial security. Megan's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained hard. Fine. Be stubborn. Spend all your money on treatments that probably won't work anyway. But don't expect me to stick around and watch you waste everything Mom and Dad worked for. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. At the threshold, she turned back. William's offer is only good for another week. Think about it, Dad. Think about what's really best for both of us. The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone in the house that Catherine and I had filled with love and laughter. The house that Megan now saw as nothing more than a liquidatable asset. I walked to the window and watched William's Mercedes pull away from the curb. In the passenger seat, Megan was already on her phone, probably telling him how the conversation had gone. That night I sat in my study, surrounded by insurance forms and treatment schedules, trying to understand how the daughter I'd raised had become someone who could look at her dying father and see only an obstacle to her financial plans. But as I sat there in the darkness, something else was growing alongside my heartbreak. Something cold and calculating that I'd never felt before. If Megan wanted to think practically about the future, then maybe it was time I started thinking practically too. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Michael Rodriguez, the attorney who'd handled Catherine's will. It was late, but Michael had always told me to call if I needed anything. Michael, it's David Thompson. I know it's late, but I need to schedule an appointment. I need to make some changes to my will. The week that followed my call to attorney Michael Rodriguez was the longest of my life. Not because of the cancer. I'd already made peace with that battle. But because I couldn't stop thinking about the look in Megan's eyes when she'd called our family home just a house. The calculation. The coldness. Where had I gone wrong as a father? I tried to throw myself into research about my treatment options, but my mind kept wandering to William Sterling. Something about the man had set off every alarm bell I had developed in 40 years of dealing with contractors, suppliers, and business partners. Maybe it was the way his expensive suit looked too perfect, like a costume. Maybe it was how he dismissed my questions about his business plan with corporate buzzwords that meant nothing. Or maybe it was the way he'd looked at my house. Not like a guest, but like an appraiser. I was sitting in my kitchen Thursday morning, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, when I heard Megan's key in the lock. She hadn't been home since our confrontation 3 days earlier, and part of me had wondered if she'd come back at all. "Dad," she called out, her voice tentative. "Are you home?" "In the kitchen," I replied, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. She appeared in the doorway, looking like she hadn't slept much. Her usually perfect makeup was minimal, and she was wearing clothes I recognized from high school. Comfort clothes she only wore when she was stressed. "I brought coffee," she said, holding up a bag from the expensive place downtown. "That Colombian blend you like?" An olive branch. Or maybe just softening me up for another sales pitch. "Thanks, honey. Sit down." She took the chair across from me, the same one she'd occupied during our last conversation. This time, though, she kept her phone in her purse and her hands folded on the table. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said. About Mom, about the house, about everything." I waited. In my business, I'd learned that the first person to speak usually loses the negotiation. I know I came on too strong the other day. William says I do that sometimes, get excited about opportunities and forget to consider other people's feelings. William says. Already he was the authority on my daughter's personality. "I want you to get to know him better," she continued. "Really get to know him. Because once you see what kind of man he is, what kind of future he can offer, I think you'll understand why this investment is so important." "What exactly are you proposing?" "Dinner, tomorrow night, just the three of us. William wants to show you the business plan, answer all your questions. He says he respects your background in construction and wants your honest opinion." I almost laughed. William Sterling respecting my opinion was like a snake respecting a mouse's opinion on the best way to be swallowed. "All right," I said. "But we're eating here. I'll cook." Megan's face lit up with relief. "Really? Oh, Dad, thank you. This is going to change everything, I promise." That's what I was afraid of. Friday evening arrived, gray and cold, typical November in Denver. I'd spent the day preparing Catherine's famous pot roast recipe, the one that had been Megan's favorite since she was 8 years old. If we were going to have this conversation, it would be surrounded by memories of better times. William arrived precisely at 7, carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. He'd dressed down for the occasion, if you could call a cashmere sweater and tailored slacks dressing down. "David," he said, shaking my hand with that same too-firm grip. "Thank you for opening your home to me. I know family is sacred ground. Family is sacred ground." The phrase struck me as oddly formal, like something he'd rehearsed. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." I led him into the living room, noting how his eyes moved around the space like he was conducting an inventory. They lingered on the original hardwood floors, the restored crown molding the built-in bookcases that Catherine and I had spent 3 weekends refinishing. "Beautiful work," he said. "You can see the craftsmanship in every detail. They don't build them like this anymore." "No, they don't," I agreed. Catherine and I restored most of it ourselves. Took us 5 years. "A labor of love," William said, but his tone suggested he viewed such labor as quaint rather than admirable. Megan appeared from the kitchen wearing one of Catherine's old aprons, a detail that hit me harder than I'd expected. "Everything smells amazing, Dad. William, you're going to love this. Dad's been making this recipe since I was little." We settled around the dining room table, the same table where Catherine and I had shared thousands of meals, where we'd helped Megan with homework, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesday nights that now seemed precious in retrospect. "So, William," I said, carving the roast, "Megan tells me you're in tech consulting. That's a pretty broad field." "It is, indeed," William replied, accepting a plate with the enthusiasm of someone who usually dined on more expensive fare. "My focus is on digital transformation for small to medium enterprises, helping them leverage cloud-based solutions to optimize their operational efficiency." More buzzwords. I tried a different approach. "What's your background? How did you get into the field?" "Oh, I've worn many hats over the years. Started in traditional consulting back in the 80s, moved into real estate development, dabbled in import-export. The key is recognizing trends before they become obvious to everyone else." Vague answers that revealed nothing concrete. Classic con man technique. Keep the mark guessing while maintaining an air of expertise. "And this current venture, the one requiring a $200,000 investment?" William set down his fork and leaned forward slightly. "David, I'm glad you asked. See, most people think about technology companies in terms of products, apps, software gadgets. But the real money is in the infrastructure. The platforms that enable other businesses to succeed." He pulled out his phone and swiped to what looked like a polished presentation. "We're developing a proprietary system that allows small businesses to integrate their inventory management, customer relations, and financial reporting into one seamless platform. The efficiency gains are extraordinary. Sounds like there are already dozens of companies doing exactly that," I said. "Salesforce, QuickBooks, Microsoft. What makes your approach different?" "Ah, that's the genius of it," William said, his eyes lighting up with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. "Our system uses AI-driven predictive analytics to anticipate business needs before they arise. We're not just organizing data. We're creating actionable intelligence." Megan was nodding along like she understood every word, but I could see the glassy look in her eyes that meant she was lost. "Can I see some of the code, the technical specifications?" William's smile never wavered. "I wish I could, David. But you understand, proprietary technology requires certain confidentialities. Our developers have signed NDAs worth more than most people's houses." Of course they had. What about your other investors? Can you provide references? Client confidentiality, I'm afraid. Though I can tell you they include several prominent figures in Denver's business community. People whose names you'd recognize. But you can't tell me who they are. Not at this stage, no. I set down my fork and looked directly at William. So you want me to invest $200,000 in a business plan? I can't see for technology, I can't examine backed by investors, I can't verify. Dad? Megan interjected, her voice tight with embarrassment. You're being rude. Am I? Or am I being prudent? William held up a hand, his expression understanding. No. Megan, your father is absolutely right to ask tough questions. It shows he's a smart businessman. He turned to me. David, I respect your skepticism. In fact, it's exactly why I wanted to meet you personally. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. These are letters of intent from our preliminary investor group. Obviously, the names are redacted for privacy, but you can see the commitment levels. I opened the envelope and found several official-looking documents on expensive letterhead. The amounts were impressive. $500,000 here, $750,000 there. But the names were indeed blacked out, and something about the formatting seemed off. These could be generated by anyone with a computer and a decent printer, I said. William's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I suppose they could be, just as your construction contracts could be fabricated or your bank statements could be doctored. At some point, business relationships require trust. Trust is earned, I replied, and usually backed up with verifiable information. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Megan was looking back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match, her face flushed with what looked like panic. You know what? William said, standing smoothly. I think I understand the situation here. You're protective of your daughter, which is admirable. You're facing a serious illness, which puts everything in perspective. And you've worked hard for what you have, which makes you cautious about risk. He moved to stand behind Megan's chair, placing his hands on her shoulders in a gesture that was clearly meant to look protective, but struck me as possessive. But here's what I think you're missing, David. Megan is a remarkable young woman with enormous potential. She deserves more than spending her 20s watching her father die slowly, while their assets get consumed by medical bills. The words hit like a slap. Megan gasped. William, she started. No, it's honest. He continued, his voice remaining calm and reasonable. David, I'm offering your daughter a chance at a real future. Financial security, social connections, opportunities. She'll never have scraping by in Denver on whatever's left after your treatments. And what exactly does Megan bring to this business partnership? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. She brings youth energy and, most importantly, access to investment capital through her inheritance. There it was. Finally, some truth. So you're not investing in Megan's potential. You're investing in my death. William shrugged, his mask of corporate politeness finally slipping. I'm investing in reality, David. You have stage 3 cancer. Even with treatment, your 5-year survival rate is, 60%. And that's assuming the treatment works, which costs $40,000 out of pocket, plus whatever your insurance doesn't cover for follow-up care, medications, complications. He began pacing around the dining room like he was giving a boardroom presentation. By the time you're done fighting this thing, if you survive it, Megan will be 30 with no career prospects, no savings, and a house she can't afford to maintain on her gallery wages. If you even still have the house. Dad, Megan whispered, her face pale. He doesn't mean... "Oh, I mean exactly what I'm saying," William interrupted. "Your father is thinking emotionally instead of practically. He's so focused on fighting an unwinnable battle that he's ignoring the logical solution. Which is..." William stopped pacing and looked directly at me. "Skip the treatment. Sell the house. Invest the money wisely. Enjoy whatever time you have left, knowing that Megan will be financially secure when you're gone." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking, the furnace cycling on the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. "Get out," I said quietly. "Dad," Megan started. "Get out of my house," I repeated, standing up. "Now." William straightened his sweater and smiled that practiced smile. "I understand you're emotional right now. Take some time to think about what I've said. Really think about what's best for Megan." He moved toward the door, then turned back. "Oh, and David? The offer has a deadline. 2 weeks from today. After that, I'll be moving on to other opportunities." "What does that mean?" I asked. His smile widened. "It means that if you're not willing to provide for your daughter's future, I'll find someone who is." The front door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Megan and me alone in the dining room with the remains of what had been Catherine's recipe and was now something that tasted like ash in my mouth. "Dad, I'm so sorry." Megan began, tears streaming down her face. "He's not usually like that. He's been under a lot of stress with the business and..." "Megan, stop." She looked at me with Catherine's green eyes, and for a moment I saw my little girl again. The one who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, who'd insisted I check her closet for monsters every night until she was 12. Who'd cried on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart. "Honey, I need you to listen to me very carefully. That man doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about your future or your potential or your happiness. He cares about my house and whatever money I have in the bank." "That's not true," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "He just told me to my face that I should skip cancer treatment and die so you could inherit money to invest in his business. Does that sound like love to you?" Megan was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "He says people our age don't understand how the world really works. That sometimes you have to make hard choices for the greater good." "And what did he tell you the greater good was?" "My future," she whispered. "He says I'm too special to waste my life taking care of a sick old man." The words hung between us like poison in the air. I felt something die inside my chest. Not the cancer, but something more fundamental. The last vestige of the father who'd believed his daughter would choose love over money, family over opportunity, right over wrong. "I see," I said finally. "And what do you think, Megan? Do you think I'm a sick old man whose death would be convenient for your future?" She looked up at me with tears in her eyes, and I saw the moment she made her choice. "I think," she said slowly, "that maybe William has a point. Maybe there are more important things than clinging to the past." I nodded, feeling strangely calm. "Thank you for being honest." I began clearing the dishes, my movements mechanical and precise. Megan sat at the table watching me, perhaps waiting for me to argue, to plead, to try to change her mind. Instead, I loaded the dishwasher and wiped down the counters. Normal domestic tasks that helped me think clearly for the first time in weeks. "I'll be staying at Williams for a while," Megan said as I finished cleaning, "to give you time to think about his offer." "That's probably for the best," I replied without turning around. "Dad, yes, I do love you." I turned to look at her. Then this young woman who had my wife's eyes and a stranger's heart. I know you do, sweetheart, in your own way. After she left, I sat in my study and opened my laptop. Time to do some real research on William Sterling. Because something told me that what I'd learned tonight was just the beginning. And if William Sterling wanted to play hardball with a dying man's family, well, he was about to learn that some old dogs still had bite left in them. I started with a simple Google search, William Sterling Denver. What I found in the first 5 minutes made my blood run cold. The first search result hit me like a freight train. William Sterling III, charged with investment fraud, 2019. I clicked the link with trembling fingers, my coffee growing cold as I read the Denver Post article dated just 4 years ago. William Sterling, 66 at the time, had been charged with running a Ponzi scheme that bilked elderly investors out of nearly $2 million. The charges were eventually dropped due to procedural irregularities and insufficient evidence. But the details in the article made my stomach turn. His pattern was sickeningly familiar. Target lonely widows and widowers, promise extraordinary returns on tech investments. Use personal charm and fake business documents to gain trust. The victims ranged in age from 62 to 84. One woman, Margaret Chen, had lost her entire life savings of $340,000. But what made my blood freeze was the final paragraph. Sterling's operation allegedly involved recruiting young women to serve as relationship facilitators, essentially using romance and family connections to identify and access potential victims' assets. Relationship facilitators. I kept searching, my fingers moving across the keyboard with the precision of a man whose life had just found new purpose. William Sterling Denver romance scam. William Sterling young women accomplices. William Sterling inheritance fraud. Each search revealed another piece of the puzzle. A Better Business Bureau warning about Sterling's various business aliases. A civil lawsuit filed by the family of an 89-year-old man who'd signed over his property deed to Sterling after being befriended by a young woman who claimed to love him. A Facebook group called Sterling Scam Survivors, with over 200 members sharing their stories. And then I found the smoking gun. Buried in the comments section of a local news article, I found a post from someone named Jennifer M47. My sister Ashley was recruited by Sterling in 2018. She was supposed to date older men and get them to invest. When she tried to quit, he threatened to release compromising photos. Took her 6 months to escape. If anyone has info about current victims, please contact me. I screenshotted everything, creating a digital folder that I labeled William Sterling, Evidence. By 3 in the morning, I had compiled a dossier that painted a picture of a man who had turned manipulating grieving families into an art form. But I wasn't done. I needed more than Google searches. I needed proof that would hold up in court. The next morning, I called in a favor from my old business partner, Tom Chen. Yes, Margaret Chen's son. Tom had become a private investigator after his mother lost her savings to Sterling, driven by the same thirst for justice that now consumed me. "David," Tom said when I explained the situation, "I've been waiting 4 years for someone to give me another shot at this bastard. What do you need?" "Everything. Financial records, current addresses, associates' patterns. I want to know what he had for breakfast and who he's planning to have for lunch." "Consider it done. But David, you need to be careful. Sterling doesn't just steal money. He destroys people. And if your daughter is in as deep as you think she is, this could get ugly fast." 2 days later, Tom called with his preliminary findings. "David, you need to sit down for this." I was already sitting in my study surrounded by printouts and notes, but I gripped the phone tighter. Sterling is currently running at least 3 different scams simultaneously. The tech consulting thing is just one layer. He's also got a fake charity for cancer research. Yeah, you heard that right. And he's been selling investment opportunities in non-existent real estate developments in Costa Rica. How many victims? That we can identify at least 15 active marks. But here's the kicker. Your daughter isn't just a victim, David. She's on his payroll. The room seemed to tilt sideways. What do you mean payroll? Bank records show regular payments of $5,000 per month from one of Sterling's shell companies to Megan Thompson starting 8 months ago. The payments are listed as consulting fees, but we both know what she's really consulting on. 8 months. Megan had been working for Sterling for 8 months, which meant she'd been lying to me since before I was even diagnosed with cancer. There's more, Tom continued. Sterling's got a whole roster of young women working for him. They call themselves lifestyle consultants. But they're basically professional daughters. They target wealthy older men. Recent widowers are the specialty, and build relationships designed to access their assets. How many daughters does he have, Shmenkin? 7 that we can confirm, ages 22 to 29. 3 of them are currently engaged to men over 65. 1 wedding is scheduled for next month. I felt sick. What about his background? His real background? William Sterling III doesn't exist. The man your daughter is dating is actually William Stanton, 71 years old, originally from Phoenix. He's got a rap sheet going back 30 years. Fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. He served 18 months in Arizona State Prison in 2005 for running a similar scam there. And the tech business? Total fiction. The address he gave you for his office? It's a Kinko's. The phone number routes to a Google Voice account. The letters of intent you saw, computer-generated forgeries. I could make better ones in my garage. I sat in silence, absorbing the magnitude of my daughter's betrayal. This wasn't just about choosing money over family. This was about choosing to become a predator. Tom, I need you to do something else for me. Name it. I need to know everything about his current targets. Every old man he's got in his sights. Every family he's planning to destroy. David, what are you thinking? I looked at the photo of Catherine on my desk, then at the stack of medical bills I'd been putting off. The bills I'd been planning to pay with the money I'd saved for 40 years, the money that William Sterling now saw as his retirement fund. I'm thinking it's time someone turned the tables on William Sterling. He wants to play with people's lives. Let's see how he likes having his own life played with. That sounds dangerous. Tom, I'm 58 years old with stage 3 lung cancer. Dangerous is a relative concept. Over the next week, Tom and I developed what I called Operation Mirror. The plan was simple, in concept complex. In execution, we would document Sterling's entire operation, gather evidence of his current crimes, and then systematically dismantle his network by warning his targets and exposing his methods. But first, I needed to see the operation in action. I needed to watch my daughter at work. Tom had discovered that Sterling's crew met every Tuesday evening at an upscale wine bar in Cherry Creek called Eleve. It was a perfect hunting ground. Wealthy, divorced men looking for companionship, young women looking for opportunity alcohol to smooth the introductions. I spent an hour in my closet choosing my outfit carefully. Expensive but not flashy. Confident but approachable. The kind of man who might have money, but wouldn't be too careful with it. I put on the Rolex that Catherine had given me for our 25th anniversary, the one I'd been saving for special occasions that never seemed to come. Tonight felt special enough. Elevee was exactly what I'd expected. Exposed brick walls, dim lighting wine prices that could fund a small country's defense budget. I took a seat at the bar, where I could observe the main dining area, and ordered a glass of their cheapest red wine, which still cost more than I usually spent on a whole bottle. I didn't have to wait long. William Sterling entered at exactly 7:30 p.m., dressed in another perfectly tailored suit. He was followed by 3 young women, including Megan. But this wasn't the Megan I knew. This was someone else entirely. Her hair was styled differently, more sophisticated. Her dress was expensive, professional, but alluring. She moved with a confidence I'd never seen before, scanning the room like a predator assessing prey. They split up immediately. William took a table near the windows where he'd be visible to the entire restaurant. The 3 women dispersed to different areas. Megan headed to the bar, about 10 feet from where I was sitting, while the other 2 positioned themselves at high-top tables with clear sight lines to the room. I watched in horrified fascination as they went to work. Megan's first target was a man about my age, well-dressed, sitting alone at the bar, reading what looked like financial reports. She approached with the hesitant smile of someone who wasn't quite sure if she should be bothering him. "Excuse me," I heard her say. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help noticing you're reading something about municipal bonds. I'm trying to help my father understand his investment options, and I'm completely lost. Would you mind if I asked you a quick question?" The man, gray-haired, probably recently divorced, based on the pale band around his ring finger, smiled warmly. "Of course. Please sit down. I'm happy to help." What followed was a masterclass in manipulation. Megan played the role of the concerned daughter perfectly. Worried about her aging father's financial security, grateful for advice from someone with obvious expertise, just vulnerable enough to be endearing, without seeming helpless. Within 20 minutes, she'd learned that her target, Robert, was a recently retired accountant who'd just received a substantial divorce settlement. She'd also mentioned that she was worried about her own financial future, that she'd been looking for investment opportunities, and that she'd love to continue their conversation over dinner sometime. Robert was completely hooked. I watched this scene play out while simultaneously observing the other women working their own targets. It was choreographed, professional, and absolutely ruthless. These weren't random hookups or casual flirtations. This was organized crime disguised as romance. And my daughter was one of the best at it. At 9:15, as if responding to some invisible signal, all 3 women began wrapping up their conversations. Business cards were exchanged, phone numbers were entered into phones, promises were made about future meetings. Megan kissed Robert on the cheek as she said goodbye, the perfect gesture of gratitude that left him blushing like a teenager. Then she walked past my seat at the bar, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Not the drugstore stuff she usually wore, but something expensive and sophisticated. She didn't see me. She was too focused on texting someone, probably reporting her success to William. I followed them outside at a distance, watching as they regrouped on the sidewalk. William gathered his team around him, like a coach debriefing after a game. "How'd we do tonight?" I heard him ask. "Robert's got $1.2 million in his settlement," Megan reported. "Recent divorce, feeling lonely, looking for investment advice. He's perfect." "Excellent. Sarah." One of the other women spoke up. "James just inherited his father's construction business. He's overwhelmed, doesn't know what he's doing. Easy mark." "And you, Jessica?" The third woman shook her head. "Mine was broke. Drinks expensive wine, but splits the check. I cut him loose." William nodded approvingly. "Good instincts. Remember, we're not running a charity here. Time is money, and money is time." He handed each woman what looked like cash. Bonuses for good work. Same time next week. And remember, these relationships take time to develop. Don't rush the process. Let them think they're falling in love. I watched my daughter pocket what looked like several $100s payment for an evening's work of destroying a lonely man's trust in human connection. As they dispersed to their cars, I remained in the shadows, my mind racing with what I'd witnessed. This wasn't just about my house or my cancer treatment. This was about a systematic operation designed to prey on people exactly like me. Grieving widowers, recent retirees, men whose wives had died and left them vulnerable to the promise of companionship. I thought about Robert probably lying in bed right now, thinking about the lovely young woman who'd been so interested in his expertise, so grateful for his help. He had no idea that he'd just been selected for destruction. But I did. And I was going to make sure Robert never had to find out the hard way. I drove home through the quiet Denver streets, my mind already formulating the next phase of my plan. William Sterling thought he was playing chess with amateurs. He was about to discover he'd challenged someone who was willing to sacrifice everything, including his own life, to protect other families from the devastation he'd brought to mine. The game was just beginning, and this time the old man wasn't going to be the victim. Back in my study, I opened my laptop and began typing an email. Dear Robert, you don't know me, but we have something in common. Tonight, a young woman named Megan approached you at Elevate Wine Bar and asked about municipal bonds. I need to tell you something that might save your life. My warning campaign was working better than I dared hope. Robert from the wine bar called me personally after receiving my email, his voice shaking with a mixture of gratitude and rage. She seemed so genuine, he kept saying. So sweet, so concerned about her father. How could I have been so stupid? You weren't stupid, I assured him. You were human, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to help someone. Through Tom's network of investigators and Sterling's previous victims, we'd managed to warn 6 other targets over the past week. 3 of them immediately cut contact with their girlfriends. 2 others decided to play along while feeding us information. The 6th one, a recently widowed doctor named Paul Martinez, came up with an idea that changed everything. David Sherm, he said during our clandestine meeting at a coffee shop in Littleton, what if instead of just playing defense, we went on offense? What do you mean? Paul leaned forward, his eyes bright with the kind of anger that comes from narrowly escaping a trap designed to destroy you. Sterling's operation depends on information, knowing who has money, who's vulnerable, who's recently lost a spouse. What if we fed him false information? What if we made him come after someone who was ready for him? You're talking about setting a trap. I'm talking about justice. My wife died 6 months ago from pancreatic cancer. I've got $800,000 in life insurance money that these predators think they can steal. What if we let them think they're succeeding right up until the moment we destroy them publicly? It was a dangerous idea. But as I looked at Paul, this 67-year-old man whose grief had been targeted like a bullseye, I realized that dangerous might be exactly what we needed. What did you have in mind? Paul smiled grimly. A funeral. Mine. The plan that emerged over the next several days was audacious, risky, and absolutely beautiful in its poetic justice. Paul would fake his own death from a sudden heart attack, making it appear that he died intestate, without a will, leaving his entire estate vulnerable to anyone who could prove a close relationship with him. Then we'd let Sterling's network discover the opportunity. But Paul's idea gave me an even more diabolical inspiration. If we were going to fake a death to catch Sterling, why not fake the death that would hurt him most? Why not rob him of his biggest prize just when he thought he'd won my death? The seed of the idea had been planted during that terrible dinner when William told me to skip treatment and die for Megan's financial benefit. What if I gave him exactly what he wanted? And then took it all away. I scheduled a meeting with Dr. Anderson to discuss the medical aspects of my plan. "David, what you're suggesting is highly irregular," he said after I'd explained what I needed. "Falsifying medical records, faking a death certificate. There could be serious legal consequences." "Doc, I'm not asking you to break the law. I'm asking you to help me expose criminals who are targeting cancer patients and their families." Sterling's fake charity claims to fund cancer research that could help people like me. Instead, he's stealing money from people who are already fighting for their lives. Dr. Anderson was quiet for a long moment, staring at the wall where his medical degree hung next to photos of patients he'd helped beat cancer. "There might be a way," he said finally. "A way that doesn't require falsifying anything official." "I'm listening." "What if you had a sudden medical crisis that required immediate hospitalization? Something that looked termine but was actually controllable. We could use that to create the appearance of the end being near." "How near?" "Near enough that your daughter would start making funeral arrangements. Near enough that William Sterling would start counting his money. And then," Dr. Anderson smiled, "and then you'd make a miraculous recovery. Happens more often than you'd think in cancer treatment. Sometimes the body surprises us all." We scheduled my crisis for the following Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after William's ultimatum about selling the house. The timing would be perfect. Just when Sterling thought he'd pressured me into giving up, I'd appear to give up permanently. But first, I needed to update my will, and I needed to do it in a way that would send a very clear message about what I thought of daughters who sold their fathers for money. Attorney Michael Rodriguez met me at his office that Saturday morning, the same day that Megan was probably at Eleve recruiting new victims. "David, are you sure about this?" Michael asked as he reviewed the documents I'd prepared. "This is comprehensive." "I'm sure." The new will was a work of art. Every dollar I'd ever planned to leave to Megan, the house, my savings, my life insurance, my retirement accounts, would now go to establish the Catherine Thompson Foundation for Cancer Patient Support. The foundation would provide financial assistance to families dealing with cancer-related expenses, with special attention to preventing elder abuse and investment fraud targeting vulnerable patients. But the real masterpiece was the personal letter I'd written to be read at the will reading. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes, finding me conscious but distressed, complaining of crushing chest pain and shortness of breath. My blood pressure was elevated, easy enough to achieve with the stress of what I was about to put myself through, and my oxygen saturation was slightly low, consistent with someone having a panic attack or cardiac episode. Dr. Anderson was waiting at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital when the ambulance arrived. "Mr. Thompson," he said with perfect clinical concern as they wheeled me into the ER, "can you tell me what happened?" "I was making coffee," I wheezed. Suddenly felt like someone was sitting on my chest. Couldn't catch my breath. What followed was 4 hours of genuine medical testing. Dr. Anderson couldn't fake the chest x-rays or EKG results, but he could interpret them in a way that suggested my cancer might be progressing faster than expected. The imaging shows some concerning changes, he told me privately when we were alone in my room. "Nothing immediately life-threatening, but combined with your symptoms today, it could indicate that the cancer is affecting your cardiovascular system." How concerning. Concerning enough that I want to keep you for observation. Concerning enough that if I were your family, I'd want to have some difficult conversations about the future. At 6:30 p.m., right on schedule, Dr. Anderson called Michael Rodriguez. "Mr. Rodriguez, this is Dr. Anderson at Presbyterian St. Joseph. I'm afraid Mr. Thompson has taken a turn for the worse. He's asking to see you about his will. You might want to come tonight." Michael arrived an hour later, perfectly playing his role as the concerned attorney, rushing to serve a dying client's final wishes. "David," he said, taking my hand in what looked like a gesture of comfort, but was actually him checking the pulse device we'd hidden under my hospital bracelet. A little gadget that would make my heartbeat appear irregular on the monitors. "I came as soon as I could. Dr. Anderson says you wanted to discuss your will." "Michael," I said, weakly aware that the nurse at the station could hear everything through the open door. "I've been thinking about what's really important. About family. About forgiveness." "What do you want to do, David?" "I want to change my will. I want to leave everything to Megan. Despite our disagreements. She's my daughter. She's all I have left of Catherine." The nurse at the station looked up with the kind of expression that suggested this was the most touching thing she'd heard all week. A dying father forgiving his daughter, making sure she'd be taken care of. If only she knew. I closed my eyes and thought about Catherine, about the promise I'd made at her funeral to always protect our daughter. I was about to keep that promise in the most unexpected way possible. Sometimes the only way to save someone from themselves is to let them think they've won everything, right up until the moment they realize they've lost it all. The phone on my bedside table rang at 8:43 p.m. "Dad." Megan's voice was thick with tears. Whether from grief or guilt, I couldn't tell. "Dad, I'm so sorry. Michael told me what happened. I'm coming right now." "I'm here, sweetheart," I whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Not yet, anyway. My death was beautiful. I say that without irony. The memorial service Michael Rodriguez arranged was exactly what Catherine would have wanted. Simple, dignified, attended by people who genuinely cared about the man they thought they were saying goodbye to. William had convinced 3 other women in his stable to marry their targets, in a coordinated operation designed to maximize their take before fleeing the country. They were calling it the wedding season. But here's what William Sterling didn't know I'd been busy during my death. While Megan was playing the grieving daughter and William was calculating his profits, I'd been working with Tom and the FBI. Because it turned out that when you present federal agents with evidence of a multi-state elder abuse operation involving mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges, they become very interested in helping you set up a sting operation. Special Agent Maria Santos, no relation to my neighbor, but equally committed to protecting families from predators, had been coordinating with law enforcement in 3 states to simultaneously take down William's entire network. "Mr. Thompson," she'd told me during one of our clandestine meetings, "what you've uncovered here is bigger than one con man stealing from a few families. This is organized crime. Sterling's operation has been running for at least 6 years across multiple states. We estimate he's stolen over $15 million from elderly victims. How many families has he destroyed? 43 that we can document. Probably more. 43 families. 43 people like me who'd trusted their children only to discover they'd been sold to the highest bidder. There's something else," Agent Santos had continued. "We believe Sterling is planning to leave the country after this final round of marriages. If we don't stop him now, he'll disappear into a non-extradition country and never face justice. What do you need me to do?" "Exactly what you were planning. Come back from the dead at the worst possible moment. But this time you won't be alone." The wedding was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at the Manor House, an upscale venue in Cherry Hills Village that specialized in intimate ceremonies for discerning couples. William had spared no expense, which made sense since he was spending my money. According to the guest list Tom had obtained, 150 people would be attending, including William's mysterious wife, Elizabeth Sterling, and their 2 adult children. Yes, William Sterling was still married. His wife thought he was a successful tech consultant who traveled frequently for business. She had no idea her husband was a bigamist, planning to disappear with his latest victim. 3 days before the wedding, I received the most painful piece of intelligence yet. Megan had invited Catherine's sister Rose to the wedding. Rose, who lived in Phoenix and hadn't seen Megan since my funeral, had been told this was a celebration of new beginnings, and that her presence would mean everything to Megan during this difficult time of rebuilding her life after losing her father. Rose had called me the night before my fake death to tell me how proud she was of Megan for finding love again so soon after our loss. "Catherine would be so happy," she'd said. "Megan deserves someone who can take care of her." I'd almost broken character and told Rose everything right then. Instead, I'd said goodbye to my sister-in-law, knowing it might be the last time she'd trust anything I said. But Rose's presence at the wedding gave me an idea for the perfect entrance. Saturday morning arrived, crisp and clear, perfect Colorado weather for a wedding between a predator and his accomplice. I spent an hour getting ready, choosing my outfit carefully. The navy suit Catherine had bought me for our 25th anniversary, the tie Megan had given me for Father's Day 3 years ago, and Catherine's wedding ring, which I'd moved from my nightstand to my finger. If I was going to rise from the dead, I wanted to look the part. The manor house was everything I'd expected. Manicured gardens, elegant architecture, the kind of place where wealthy people celebrated life's milestones without worrying about the cost. Valet parking, live string quartet flowers that probably cost more than most people's car payments. I watched from across the street as guests began arriving. William's wife, Elizabeth, looked elegant and completely unsuspecting, chatting warmly with other guests who had no idea they were attending a bigamist's wedding. His children, a son about 35 and a daughter about 30, seemed genuinely happy for their father's business partner's daughter, who'd found love so soon after losing her father. If only they knew. At 2:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I saw Rose arrive. She looked older than I remembered, more fragile, wearing the same black dress she'd worn to Catherine's funeral. She'd brought flowers, white roses, Catherine's favorites. My heart broke watching her walk into that chapel, believing she was celebrating something beautiful instead of witnessing the culmination of an elaborate crime. At 2:50 p.m., I received the text I'd been waiting for. "All units in position. You're clear to proceed. Agent Santos." I crossed the street, nodded to the valet who looked confused by my lack of a car, and walked through the front doors of the manor house like I owned the place. The ceremony had just begun. I could hear the wedding march playing as I made my way through the lobby toward the chapel doors. Through the glass, I could see Megan walking down the aisle in a white dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her arm linked with Tom Chen, who was playing the role of the substitute father figure giving away the bride. Tom had volunteered for this part of the operation, saying it would give him particular satisfaction to hand Megan over to her doom instead of her future. William Sterling stood at the altar in a tuxedo that probably cost as much as my monthly cancer treatments, beaming with the confidence of a man who believed he'd just pulled off the perfect crime. The officiant, a minister who'd been told this was a rushed ceremony due to my recent death and the couple's desire to start their new life together, began the traditional words, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of William Sterling and Megan Thompson in holy matrimony. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace." This was my cue. I opened the chapel doors and stepped inside. The gasps started from the back and rippled forward like a wave. Heads turned, people stood. Someone screamed. I heard Rose whisper, "David," in a voice filled with disbelief and hope. But I only had eyes for two people. Megan, standing at the altar in her white dress, had gone completely pale. Her bouquet fell from her hands as she stared at me like she was seeing a ghost. Which, in fairness, she was. William Sterling's face went through a remarkable transformation. Shock, fear, calculation, and finally rage. I could practically see his mind racing, trying to figure out how his perfect crime had just turned into his worst nightmare. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, walking slowly down the aisle. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was murder." The silence in the chapel was deafening. 150 people trying to process what they were seeing, a dead man walking into his daughter's wedding. "Dad," Megan whispered. But you're dead," I finished. Yes, I heard that rumor too. Greatly exaggerated, as it turns out. I reached the front of the chapel and turned to address the congregation. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting what I'm sure you believed was a joyous occasion. My name is David Thompson, and according to everyone in this room, I died 3 weeks ago from cancer." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elizabeth Sterling looked confused, her children looked concerned, and Rose looked like she might faint from joy. "The thing is," I continued, "I didn't die. I've been investigating the man my daughter was planning to marry, and what I discovered will shock you as much as it shocked me." William stepped forward, his charming mask sliding back into place. "David, my friend, you gave us quite a scare. We thought, well, obviously there was some kind of miscommunication. But you're here now, and that's what matters. We can postpone the ceremony." "Oh, I wouldn't dream of interrupting," I said. "Please continue. But first I'd like to introduce my daughter's fiancé to some people he might not have met." I gestured toward the back of the chapel where Agent Santos was entering with a team of FBI agents. "William Sterling meet Special Agent Maria Santos. Agent Santos meet William Sterling. Though I believe you might know him better as William Stanton, wanted in 3 states for elder abuse, investment fraud, and conspiracy." The chapel erupted in chaos. Elizabeth Sterling screamed and collapsed into her seat. Her children rushed to her side. Guests began talking all at once, trying to understand what was happening. But Agent Santos's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "William Stanton, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and bigamy. You have the right to remain an attorney." As the handcuffs clicked around William's wrists, I turned to Megan. She was standing frozen at the altar, still in her white dress, watching her future crumble around her. "Megan Thompson." Agent Santos continued, "You're also under arrest as an accomplice to—" "Wait," I said, holding up my hand. "Before you arrest my daughter, I'd like to say something." I reached into my jacket and pulled out an envelope. The same envelope that contained the will Michael was supposed to read the following week. "Megan, you thought you were marrying William for my money. Money you believed you'd inherited when I died. I'd like to read you something I wrote before my death." I opened the letter and began reading aloud, my voice carrying clearly through the silent chapel. "To my daughter Megan, if you are hearing this, it means I discovered the truth about William Stanton, his criminal history, and your role as a paid accomplice in his elder abuse operation." Megan's face crumpled as I read her the letter, each word hitting like a physical blow. By the time I reached the part about leaving everything to the Catherine Thompson Foundation, she was sobbing. "You chose money over your father's life." I continued reading. "I have chosen to ensure that money goes to people who actually need it. Cancer patients whose families love them enough to fight for their lives instead of hoping for their deaths. I folded the letter and looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for what I knew would be the last time. "I hope someday you remember what love actually means," I said softly. Then I turned to Agent Santos. "Now you can arrest her." As federal agents led both Megan and William away in handcuffs, the chapel slowly emptied. Elizabeth Sterling, supported by her children, approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Thompson, sus," she said, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. 35 years of marriage, and I never knew." "Neither did I replied. "Neither did any of us." Rose was the last to leave, wrapping me in a hug that felt like forgiveness and resurrection combined. "Catherine would be proud," she whispered. "You saved so many families from what happened to yours." After everyone left, I stood alone in the empty chapel, surrounded by wedding flowers and abandoned dreams. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Santos. 4 more arrests made simultaneously in Phoenix and Seattle. The entire network is down. 43 families will see justice. Thank you. I thought about Catherine, about the promise I'd made to protect our daughter. I'd kept that promise, just not in the way either of us had expected. Sometimes love means letting someone face the consequences of their choices, even when those consequences will destroy them. Sometimes the greatest act of parental love is refusing to enable your child's worst impulses. And sometimes the only way to save someone is to let them lose everything. The Catherine Thompson Foundation had become more than just a way to keep my money away from Megan. It had become my second career, my mission, and perhaps the most important work I'd ever done. We operated out of the basement of my house, the same basement where Catherine and I had once planned our retirement travels. Now it housed 3 desks, 2 investigators, and a phone that rang constantly, with calls from families who'd heard about our work and needed help protecting their elderly parents from romance scams. Tom Chen had become our head investigator, using his skills to trace suspicious relationships and financial patterns. Santos, my neighbor, not the FBI agent, volunteered 20 hours a week answering phones and providing the kind of grandmother figure that victims often needed when their own families had turned against them. But our most valuable team member was someone I never expected, Elizabeth Sterling. William's ex-wife had lost everything in the divorce. Their house, their savings, 35 years of shared memories that turned out to be built on lies. But instead of retreating into bitterness, she'd thrown herself into making sure no other wife would go through what she'd experienced. "David," she said during one of our Tuesday morning case reviews, "I've been thinking about the Peterson file." Margaret Peterson, 73, had contacted us the previous week about her 26-year-old granddaughter, Jessica, who'd appeared in her life just months after Margaret's husband died. Jessica claimed to be the daughter of Margaret's estranged aunt, reaching out to reconnect with family in her time of grief. Jessica was asking Margaret to invest in a business opportunity, a small restaurant that would honor her late husband's memory by serving the kind of food he'd loved. "It's textbook," Elizabeth continued. "The timing, the emotional manipulation, the business investment angle. I'd bet my remaining savings that Jessica works for someone just like William." She was right, of course. Our investigation revealed that Jessica was actually Amanda Foster, 27, who worked for a network of con artists operating out of Miami. Margaret Peterson was one of 7 elderly targets being worked simultaneously. We'd managed to warn Margaret before she lost her life savings. But the case had taken a toll on all of us. There were so many predators, so many victims, so many families being torn apart by greed disguised as love. "How many more are out there?" Elizabeth asked, voicing the question that haunted all of us. How many families are going through what ours went through? I didn't have an answer. But I had a phone call to make. Agent Santos, the FBI agent not my neighbor, had become a regular contact over the past 6 months. The arrests at the wedding had led to a federal investigation that ultimately took down romance scam operations in 12 states. "David," she said when I called her that Tuesday afternoon, "I was just about to call you. We've got some news about your daughter." Megan had been serving her sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Greenwood, a minimum security facility about 2 hours from Denver. She'd pled guilty to conspiracy charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. 3 years instead of the 7 to 10 she could have faced if the case had gone to trial. I hadn't spoken to her since the wedding. She'd written me letters, dozens of them, but I'd returned them all unopened. I wasn't ready to hear her apologies, her explanations, her promises to change. Some wounds need time to heal before they can handle being touched. "What kind of news?" I asked. "She's been accepted into a rehabilitation program, victim advocacy training. It's a pilot program where white-collar criminals work with the families they've helped victimize. She's asked permission to contact you." My first instinct was to say no. The man who'd been betrayed by his daughter, who'd watched her laugh about his death, who'd seen her choose money over his life. That man wanted nothing to do with whatever Megan Thompson had become in prison. But the man who'd started the Catherine Thompson Foundation, who'd dedicated his life to protecting families from predators, who'd seen too many parents lose their children to forces beyond their control, that man was curious about redemption. "What would contact look like, ma?" I asked. "A supervised phone call. Then, if both parties agree, supervised meetings. The program is designed to help criminals understand the real impact of their actions, while giving victims a chance to find closure." Closure. Such a small word for such a complicated concept. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need. But David, for what it's worth, the prison psychologist says she's made remarkable progress. She's been working with other inmates who were victimized by romance scams before they became perpetrators themselves. Turns out a lot of these women started as victims." After Agent Santos hung up, I sat in my study looking at the photo of Catherine on my desk. What would she want me to do? How do you balance justice with mercy, accountability with forgiveness, protection with love? I was still pondering these questions when the phone rang again. "Mr. Thompson, this is Janet Morrison from the Denver Post. I'm working on a story about romance scams targeting elderly widowers, and I understand you've become something of an expert on the subject." Janet Morrison. The name rang a bell, then hit me like a freight train. Morrison was the maiden name of the journalist who'd written the original expose about William Sterling's operation 4 years ago. The article I had found during my first Google search. "Are you related to Patricia Morrison?" I asked. "She's my mother. She covered the William Sterling case in 2019, and when she heard about what happened at the wedding, she insisted I follow up on the story. She says you're a hero." A hero. I'd never thought of myself that way. Heroes saved people. I'd destroyed my own daughter to save strangers. "I'm not sure I'm the right person to interview," I said. "Mr. Thompson, in the 6 months since Sterling's arrest, reports of romance scams in Colorado have dropped by 40%. Families are more aware, more protective. The foundation you started has helped law enforcement identify and shut down 3 other operations. You may not feel like a hero, but you've saved dozens of families from what didn't happen to yours." That evening, I called Tom Chen and asked him to meet me for coffee. We sat in the same shop where I'd once planned my investigation into William Sterling, but this time I was wrestling with a different kind of decision. "Tom, do you think people can really change?" He considered the question carefully. Tom had spent 4 years hunting William Sterling, 4 years letting anger consume his life after his mother lost her savings. If anyone understood the desire for vengeance, it was him. "I think," he said finally, "that some people can change if they face real consequences for their actions and genuinely understand the pain they've caused. But I also think that some betrayals are so deep that forgiveness becomes a choice the victim has to make for their own peace, not because the perpetrator deserves it." "What would you do if it was your daughter in prison asking for a chance to apologize?" Tom was quiet for a long moment. "I'd probably take the meeting. Not because I thought she deserved forgiveness, but because I'd want to look her in the eye and decide for myself whether her remorse was real. And if it wasn't real, then I'd know I'd tried everything, and I could live with whatever decision I made after that." 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a sterile conference room at the Federal Correctional Institution in Greenwood, waiting for my daughter to walk through a door I wasn't sure either of us was ready to open. She looked different. Older, obviously, but also smaller somehow. The confidence that had once defined her, even when it was being used to manipulate elderly men, had been replaced by something that looked like genuine humility. "Dad," she said, sitting across from me at a table that felt miles wide. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, but didn't speak. I'd promised myself I would listen first, judge second. "I know you probably don't want to hear this," she continued, "but I need to tell you how sorry I am. Not sorry I got caught, not sorry I'm in prison, but sorry for what I did to you. Sorry for what I became." She paused, struggling with words that seemed insufficient for the magnitude of what lay between us. "I've been working with a therapist here, and she helped me understand something I didn't want to face. When Mom died, I lost more than a mother. I lost the person who taught me what love looked like. And instead of grieving that loss, instead of letting you help me through it, I decided love was just another transaction." I found my voice. "When did it start? When did you first take money from Sterling?" "About a year after Mom died. I met him at a gallery opening. He seemed so sophisticated, so successful. When he offered me a job as a relationship consultant, I told myself it was just marketing, helping lonely people find connections." "And when did you realize it wasn't marketing?" Megan's eyes filled with tears. "I always knew, Dad, from the very first assignment. But by then I'd convinced myself that these men had more money than they needed, that I was providing a service, that everyone was getting something out of the arrangement. Everyone except the families who got destroyed. Everyone except the families who got destroyed," she repeated quietly. We sat in silence for several minutes. I studied her face, looking for traces of the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms. The teenager who'd cried on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart. The young woman who'd hugged me at her college graduation and promised to make me proud. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally. "I don't know if I should forgive you." "I don't expect you to," she replied. "I just needed you to know that I understand what I did. I understand that I chose money over my father's life. I understand that I betrayed everything Mom tried to teach me about love and family and what really matters. And what do you plan to do with that understanding?" "I want to help other families avoid what happened to ours." "The Victim Advocacy Program. It's teaching me to recognize the warning signs from the other side. I want to spend whatever life I have left making sure other daughters don't make the choice I made. I looked at my daughter. This woman who shared my DNA, but had become a stranger through her own choices, and realized that the question wasn't whether she deserved forgiveness. The question was whether I could live with myself if I didn't at least try to find a path forward. If you're serious about helping other families, I said, then prove it. When you get out of prison, come work for the foundation. Not for money, we don't pay much. Not for redemption, that's something you'll have to find on your own. But if you want to spend your life undoing some of the damage you helped create, then show me. Megan looked up with something that might have been hope. You'd let me work for the foundation. After everything I did, I'd let you earn the right to work for the foundation. There's a difference. What would I have to do? I thought about all the families we'd helped, all the predators we'd exposed, all the elderly people who were sleeping peacefully tonight because someone had warned them about the charming young person trying to steal their hearts and their savings. You'd have to look them in the eye, I said. Every victim, every family member, every person whose life was damaged by people like William Sterling and people like the person you used to be. You'd have to face what you helped cause. And then you'd have to spend every day for the rest of your life making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. 3 months later, I stood at Catherine's grave on what would have been our 32nd wedding anniversary. The headstone was weathered now, softened by 3 years of Colorado seasons, but her name was still clear. Catherine Elizabeth Thompson, beloved wife and mother. I hope I did the right thing, I said aloud, placing fresh roses on her grave. With Megan, with the foundation, with all of it. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and for a moment, I could almost hear Catherine's voice reminding me that love isn't about making easy choices. It's about making choices you can live with. My phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth Sterling. David, we just prevented another scam in Colorado Springs. Saved a 68-year-old widower from losing $200,000. That's the 15th family this month. 15 families who would go to sleep tonight with their savings intact, their trust unbroken, their grief uncomplicated by betrayal. I thought about Megan still serving her sentence, but scheduled for release in 18 months. I thought about the conversation we'd have when she got out about whether she'd really changed or just learned to say what people wanted to hear. I thought about forgiveness and whether it was something you gave or something you chose, whether it required the other person to deserve it or just required you to decide you were ready to stop carrying the weight of their betrayal. Mostly I thought about Catherine and the promise I'd made to protect our daughter. I'd kept that promise, just not in the way either of us had expected. Sometimes protecting someone means letting them fall so completely that they have no choice but to learn how to stand on their own. Sometimes love looks like justice, and justice looks like love. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to face the consequences of their choices and decide who they want to become next. As I walked back to my car, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. Mr. Thompson, this is Robert Martinez. You don't know me, but 6 months ago, you sent me an email warning me about a young woman I'd met at a wine bar. You saved my life savings, but more than that, you saved my faith in humanity. I'd like to make a donation to your foundation. That's very generous, Mr. Martinez, but not necessary. It is necessary, he said firmly. Because next week my daughter is bringing her new boyfriend home to meet me. He's older, successful, and very interested in my recent inheritance from my father's estate. And thanks to you, I know exactly what questions to ask. After I hung up, I sat in my car for a moment thinking about ripple effects and second chances, about the difference between justice and revenge, about families protecting each other across generations and circumstances. The Katherine Thompson Foundation had saved dozens of families from romance scams. But more than that, it had taught those families to protect each other, to ask hard questions, to choose love over easy money. Maybe that was what redemption really looked like. Not erasing the damage you'd caused, but making sure the damage stopped with you. I drove home through the familiar streets of Denver, past the coffee shop where Katherine and I used to have Sunday breakfast, past the park, where I'd taught Megan to ride her bike past the house, where my family had been born and broken and perhaps someday rebuilt. In my driveway, I sat for a moment, looking at the Victorian house that Katherine and I had restored board by board, the house that William Sterling had tried to steal, the house that was now headquarters for an organization dedicated to protecting other families from predators like him. Sometimes the best revenge is a life well lived in service of something greater than yourself. Sometimes the only way to heal from betrayal is to make sure no one else has to experience what you experienced. And sometimes love really is the most powerful force in the universe. Not because it always feels good, but because it never stops trying to save what can be saved and protect what needs protecting. I climbed the steps to my front porch, turned the key in the lock that William Sterling would never touch, and walked into the house where Katherine's memory lived on, in every room, every board, every choice to love fiercely enough to demand better. The work would continue tomorrow. There would be more families to protect, more predators to expose, more daughters and sons to save from choices that would destroy them. But tonight, I was just David Thompson, Cancer Survivor Foundation founder and father, who had learned that sometimes the deepest love requires the hardest choices. And that was enough. Thank you for joining us on David Thompson's incredible journey. If this story has changed how you think about family trust, or the courage it takes to stand up for what's right, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more real stories about the strength we find in our darkest moments and the light we can create for others even in our deepest pain. Remember, love is not always gentle, but it is always worth fighting for.